All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Happy Wednesday on a very dreary day in Columbus, but it's May, so what do we expect? Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. As you heard already, the CMC is a great organization that cultivates big conversations, bold ideas, most importantly, meaningful conversation and connections that drive our region forward. And it is good to have you here as we examine another issue that matters to you, to all of us, exchange some diverse perspectives and forge connections that create a better Columbus. I am Matt Barnes. I work at NBC4, proud member of the CMC Board of Trustees. And for those of you joining us by live stream, thank you so much. We're coming to you from the Ellis and Columbus's historic Italian village. So we want to welcome everyone, however you are, wherever you are. Thank you to today's sponsor, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, and today's partners, which are the Columbus Council on World Affairs and the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. Also, the presenting sponsor of our live stream, as always, the Center of Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and of course, the Ellis for hosting us. It takes a village to put on one of these CMC forums, so we thank all of our sponsors. Let's give them a round of applause for helping us today. Let's get to this one, because I'm excited for this one. Walking the Tariff Tightrope. I don't know who came up with that title, but I love it. We're going to unpack Ohio's Business Balancing Act with its largest international trading partner, I should say, and that's not Michigan, obviously. We will unpack what the trade tensions might mean for the economic outlook between Ohio and our neighbors to the north, our good friends from Canada. And I'm glad that they were able to make the trip down to here to Ohio for that for us. To introduce today's panel, please welcome to the podium Patrick Tarian from the Columbus Council on World Affairs. Patrick?
Thanks, Matt. We had a great month last month because we graduated our Global Scholars Diploma students. So we have 1,300 high school students who spend 3 years learning about different cultures, careers that have global dimensions, and some of the most impactful global issues of our times, from trade to human trafficking to climate. And so we're really excited about that, and excited maybe as much. I don't know. When you see students, it's pretty exciting. But you guys are pretty exciting. So we're excited to be here as partners. Thank you, Columbus Metropolitan Club. We've always appreciated you as a community resource. 2025, we're 50. I'm also 50. I'll be 51, just so you know. But this is not for me. This is for the Columbus Council on World Affairs. So stay tuned. You'll be hearing more about our program in October when there's going to be some cool things happening. So let's get to it. Why Canada? You're going to hear a lot of stats, biggest trading partner for Ohio, et cetera. I want to tell you from my perspective what strikes me as some of the reasons. And next month, we'll publish our 6th edition of the Global Report. It's not out yet, but these are statistics and inventories of our global assets in the community, trade, education, et cetera. So Canada helps our local businesses. More than 350 Wendy's stores are in Canada. Okay, so what's important to us? To our food. I was talking with a soybean farmer. More soybeans are exported than they are kept in Ohio or the region in the U.S. And particularly for Canada, Canada's not the biggest export for soybeans. It's Indonesia, China, but the fertilizer. So they're thinking about tariff means more money on the more costs because of the tariffs on the fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a big impact. Who knows how many Canadians are on the Columbus Blue Jackets? This is interactive. How about you, young man? 12, I believe. Is that right? It's higher. Okay. Do I hear 13? And of course, 50 years prior to the United States, Canada held the first Thanksgiving. And last but not least, Justin Bieber. He's from Canada. For those of you that don't know who he is, we can talk. All right, now to more serious things. Today's topic, which is, I'm excited to talk about it. Hopefully we hear some interesting new things and it gets a little bit heated. I encourage people to ask questions. My first person to introduce today is the Consul General of Canada in Detroit, and that is Colin. Please join me in welcoming the Consul General. And to his left is State House Minority Leader Allison Russo, who's representing Ohio's 7th District. Please applaud extra loud if that's you. And the next guest is Bala. We call him Bala. And if you look at his name, you'll know why. Bala is Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer at Greif, one of our region's most global companies. He's also a board member with the Columbus Council on World Affairs. Yeah. And on deck is our moderator, Dan Eaton, senior reporter covering restaurants, beer and spirits, retail, autos, manufacturing, et cetera, for Columbus Business First. He was also the first reporter that interviewed me when I started we were talking about 22 years ago. And we still have that, and it has me with hair. So, Dan, you look better than you did 20 years ago. Dan Eaton.
I'm a little grayer than I was 20 years ago, that's for sure. So, as of noon today, what is the current situation between the U.S. and Canada? Because it, maybe often changes. But as our last check-in with the news, what is the tariff situation between the U.S. and Canada?
So why don't I take this?
Yeah.
If I get the mic right here. And first of all, thanks to CMC. What a great backstory for this community treasure. Really proud to be here. There's such dynamism in the city of Columbus that Canada is proud to be a partner to you. And yeah, you do have to check your watch on tariff policy. It has been moving around quite a bit. I guess I will start by saying I think we're in a better place than we were a couple months ago. The president and our new prime minister, I think, have got off to a good constructive start, really focused on what Canada and the United States share geopolitically in addressing competitive challenges around the world where we really need to be working together. There has been, I think, a step back on some of the most damaging potential tariffs for our integrated economic zone here. But we still do see the auto tariffs. We do still see the steel and aluminum tariffs. We have the fentanyl tariffs, which Canada's all in with the United States on dealing with a mutual scourge that we are the only two countries being hit by fentanyl. The tie-in to tariffs, I think, is tenuous at best, but very proud to be working hand in glove with the federal administration on fentanyl. But we need to move those tariffs off the table, and they are still there. I think just a little bit of background is, for the last 30 years, on both sides of the border, we've been working to make trade across our mutual border as seamless, as easy for business as possible, because we are partners hand in glove, certainly in the integrated auto sector, across the manufacturing sector. What we send to you here, 70% roughly, is actually inputs into manufacturing that happens here in Ohio, and vice versa. You talked about the great trade numbers. Ohio is this exporting superpower, and so much of that is because of the Canada connection. I mean, you export more to us than to your next 6th largest export markets combined. So we need to work on sort of getting back to fundamentals in that tariffs are a great tool. The president is not wrong. Tariffs are a great tool to deal with unfair trade. They're a great leverage point, but let's make sure that they're directed at our mutual challenging unfair trading practice world competitors. And for that, we need to be working together globally.
Allison, question for you. When it comes to Ohio, what are some of the industries that are maybe the most challenged by the current tariff situation?
Yeah, so, as was mentioned before, Canada is our largest trading partner. I mean, as you said before, larger than the 6 next countries combined. So it is significant. Really, if we look at our largest sectors here in the state of Ohio for our economy, agriculture, manufacturing, energy, food production, all of those things are so intimately connected to our relationship with Canada. And, when we see this level of uncertainty and tariffs being leveraged on products, at the end of the day for Ohio, that means increased costs for our small businesses, increased costs for our manufacturers, increased costs for our farmers, that get passed along to consumers here. And I think at a time when many Ohioans are struggling to pay for groceries, they are struggling to pay for housing, they are struggling to pay for energy costs, this just adds on to those costs because it is working Ohioans who pay for this particular policy and this level of uncertainty. Just this week, I have talked to workers at 2 different facilities that have faced layoffs and decreases in production, specifically because of the uncertainty and the cost because of these tariffs, and the realization that it is cheaper to do this work outside of the United States, outside of Ohio, and that is not good for any of us.
Bala, question for you. You are at a manufacturer that is at the front line of this. You have operations in the U.S., operations in Ohio, operations in Canada. How does the current tariff situation impact Greif, positively or negatively?
As a global company that operates in over 40 countries worldwide, this is front and center for us, right? One thing businesses do not like is uncertainty. And you all know what happened on April 7th, and then the switch was flipped on April 8th. We went to this pause situation. So the date we are watching for is the 8th of July. So why 8th of July? So that's the 90 days, which will shift across. And as a global company that operates so many countries, that's something we watch very closely. This has an impact on 4 dimensions of a business. Dimension in terms of the demand side, dimension in terms of the supply side, the raw materials. It has an impact on the financials, and it has an impact on the people dimension of it. So we're looking at this really closely, and organizations, and I talked to so many of my peers in Fortune 500 companies, they have set up their own center of expertise. So we have a center of expertise focused on tariffs. And we pretty much check in on a daily basis. We have a tariff czar inside the organization, and he's like our chat GPT. So anytime there's a question, so yesterday I had to call him and tell him, look, I'm going to go to this forum, so tell me what's happening inside Canada. Then he gave me a complete list down, all the way from Section 232 to NAFTA going away, and the U.S. MCA coming in. So we do this country by country by country for all the 40 countries we operate in. It is something which we're watching closely. We would love to get to a situation where there is more certainty around this uncertainty.
So I'm finding a lot of the companies that I speak to are talking about treading water at this point, right? Just wanting to see where policy is going to land. So there's about 700 odd Canadian companies here in Ohio. A lot of them have made a business model about this cross-border trade, making things together across that border. One of the things I worry about for this region is this is the region that disproportionately is interconnected with Canada. So if this model of doing business, if a tariff wall stays more permanently down the middle of the Great Lakes, where does the money go? Because my sense is it doesn't come back to the Midwest. It moves south. And so I'm wondering from a business perspective, are you looking at a high tariff policy more permanent scenario, or are you thinking this will level out at some point? Do you have any confidence in your ability to understand where policy is going?
From a business perspective, and broadly speaking, businesses operate under certain boundary conditions. This is like a math equation. You have certain boundary conditions. Inside those boundary conditions, you're supposed to operate. When we know what those boundary conditions are, the mathematical equation becomes simpler and straightforward. And then over a period of time, you fine-tune it. But when the boundary conditions change, then you change. But when the boundary conditions keep going back and forth, it does lead to an uncertainty. So that is a state of flux. We only hope, and across businesses, that there is certainty in terms of what we will see and some clarity, rather than, yes, you have it now, tomorrow you may not have it, and I'm going to be pausing it. So we need that clarity, and we seek that clarity.
Related to that, Colin, you had mentioned that tariff started at one place. The situation is maybe better today than it was 3 months ago. What are one or two examples of ones that maybe are still up in the air, that are still being discussed, still being debated?
Well, you see a number of potential sectoral. So there are the sort of the broad-based tariffs, but what's already hit in terms of steel and aluminum, as you know, the U.S. only makes about 14% of the aluminum its industry needs. 60% comes from Canada. That's a huge hit to manufacturing here in the Midwest. You're looking at lumber. That's a huge asset, particularly in a housing-starved environment. That there's going to be a national security investigation on lumber. You're looking at pharmaceuticals. You're looking at a number of sectoral hits, whether it's copper, critical minerals, where there are potentials for further disruption down the road. And so, for Canada, we're looking to have a conversation with this administration that is positioned in our common geopolitical interests, and I think the President and the Prime Minister got off to a great start in situating the tariff question in that broader context, but also providing the predictability and certainty for business that has been the trademark of the U.S. economy, and certainly the secret sauce for North American prosperity for a long time. And I think if we, the conversation, and when we renegotiated the NAFTA during the first Trump administration, started off very rock and roll too, right? And it was a bigger than ever conversation at the beginning. When we started to talk about reprioritizing supply chains in North America, when we started to talking about increasing wages for American and Canadian workers, then that conversation changed, and I think we came out with an agreement that started to see, that was supported. Certainly Ohio was a big part of that, with Senator Brown and Senator Portman sort of making a bipartisan push for that outcome. But it really was part of the genesis of the type of investment you've seen back here in the Columbus area. And I hope we can get back into that kind of conversation with this second Trump administration.
Just to add to that, to really, I think, bring it back to Ohio, and I think localize it a little bit. When we have these major disruptions in our supply chain, so for example, aluminum, which is a critical input to many of our manufacturing processes, particularly in the auto industry, and you've got these disruptions, it's not as if we can overnight start producing aluminum in the United States at the level that we're importing from Canada. That means that manufacturing lines are disrupted, they are stopped. Those workers then either lose their jobs or they have to go on unemployment, which becomes, an additional strain on our state coffers and everything that comes along with that. I'll use the softwood lumber example as well. Here in this region, I don't have to tell this audience, the struggle that we have with having enough housing to meet the needs of the growing economic development of this region as well, and our new lack of new home stock. And again, when we have these disruptions, massive increases in the cost, it just exacerbates these problems that we're having in our communities and addressing our housing needs. So, these have very real on-the-ground impacts that we are going to see when we have these massive disruptions of the supply chain that ultimately, we and you as taxpayers will have to pay for when the needs of the workers and citizens in our community, they can't keep up and their needs are not being met.
And these are not just temporary disruptions either. I mean, take the aluminum example, right? It takes a decade at least to create a new smelter. It would require 4 new Hoover dams in the United States to replace Canadian production, which it's not going to happen. And in the meantime, Americans are paying the tariffs. There's been some relief on the auto sector on aluminum, but if that was still being charged, just that aluminum tariff alone adds like $3,000 to the actual cost of an F-150 in the lot. And that's a lot to ask of the American consumer, particularly when there's no immediate end in sight.
You touched on NAFTA, then we went from NAFTA to USMCA, and then we made certain commodities and products USMCA eligible. How are you looking at that today?
Sorry.
So there are certain products you don't touch, right? So they're exempt from tariffs because of the USMCA eligible list. Is that something you're negotiating, or because Canada did respond very aggressively back on the tariffs?
Yeah. So 98% of our trade has been negotiated tariff-free, and we even in the USMCA negotiation negotiated around the national security imposition of national security measures on autos, a timeout with respect to Canada on any national security measures under Section 232 to get into the weeds. That has been ignored in the current conversation, and frankly, I think that's a challenge for the United States more broadly than just in its relationship with Canada. It's a question about the credibility of the U.S. posture in negotiations, because we just reached this agreement in 2020 with President Trump. The fact that those provisions have not been followed in the current context for us is a challenge, but I think for U.S. negotiators it's going to be a challenge as well. But that tariff-free relationship that we have negotiated on all but our most sensitive sectors. You have about 7 agricultural sectors that you protect in negotiations. We have about 5. Those are very professionally negotiated arrangements, but the bulk of our trade has been on terms that no one has suggested are not free and fair and based on supply and demand and fair trade. And so that's part of the challenge for us, and part of why you see a bit of a response in Canada. It's the annexation conversation as well. But it's also that we have just been through this negotiation. where we refocus the energy on how do we compete with the world. And how do we do that most effectively is we respect the supply chains that businesses themselves are choosing to operate in North America. And that's how you address competitive challenges from offshore.
I'm going to jump in here, have some timekeeping responsibilities. So thank you, panelists. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. If you're joining us on YouTube, please type your questions into the chat. Before we take audience questions, I have one more question for you all. And that is, the tariffs are a national policy. And how do you get your, from a state level, how do you get your message that this is important to Ohio or to that administration? And Colin, similar to what you were just touching on, these are, some of the stated goals of tariffs can be good, but some of the stated goals, the aluminum industry is not going to move into Ohio all of a sudden. And if it did, it's going to take a long process. How do you convey these things to an administration that thus far does not seem open to those possible realities?
I guess I'll take this one.
Yeah.
It is a challenge. Number one, I think that certainly at the state level, whether you are a lawmaker or you are in the administration, the governor's administration, that we know the story of the relationship between Canada and Ohio. I give a lot of credit to our Canadian delegations who make very regular visits to the State House to remind all of us the importance of that relationship and the economics and the mutual benefit between both our state and a particular province or the country as a whole. It starts with that. And I also, there's room for, I think, advocacy and communication to our federal colleagues as well, and, asking, demanding sometimes that they be advocates for the state of Ohio on this issue and understand that relationship. And again, to me, it is about the very real impacts of our small businesses, our farmers, our consumers here. And there are stories to be told there, and I see that as part of my role as a state legislator, even though this is dealing with federal and international trade policy.
Yeah, clearly a federal jurisdiction, but certainly my experience has been the state and municipal levels are far closer to what's going on in terms of Ohio businesses or Michigan businesses or Kentucky, Indiana in my territory. And the state governors, particularly the state governors, when we renegotiated the NAFTA into something that I think really did start to advantage our Great Lakes economy in a way that had been neglected for too long. The reason I think we got across the finish line was because the voices of governors, of state legislators did make a very significant difference in the conversation in Washington.
Thank you so much, panelists. And now, Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. For those of you here in person, please join Doug over at the microphone. Doug, what is our first question?
Dan, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. If you're here in the audience with us and you do have a question, please do join us here at the audience microphone. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. As Dan mentioned, if you're watching online, type your question into the chat in YouTube. We'll try to get to that too. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common. They can be asked in just a few seconds. And what punctuation mark does a question end with? It ends with a question mark. Thank you to our repeat guests. I'm going to launch us off with this one. It kind of is getting back to the basics. As of today, what are the current tariffs between the U.S. and Canada? How are they different than they were 6 months ago? And who is paying them?
I guess I can take this one. It's not only confusing to the average Joe and Jane in the street, it's also confusing to people who live this. So we had the out of the gate 25% tariffs imposed on Canada and Mexico on the basis of a national emergency at in our case, the northern border. That was then removed in the case of goods that are traded under the USMCA. Canada responded with sort of a measured and calibrated response to that that impacts certain goods as well. Also adjusted. Then you had the auto sector tariffs and the steel and aluminum tariffs. So steel and aluminum tariffs, 25% across the board. Now not active for the auto industry, so there's been a break there. So they were seeing this accumulation of tariff upon tariff upon tariff that the administration here in the US walked back on. Canada responded to those tariffs as well and has modulated its tariffs on autos to address that reduction. We are going to be hearing, there's been a pause on auto parts tariffs, so that's out of the picture. And then for the rest of the world, you had the reciprocal tariff announcement, which had some interesting math to it, which then moved into a 10% baseline tariff. That does not apply to Canada, if that helps anyone. It's a bit of a moving target.
So the tariffs are difficult at best, but we have reserved.
And who pays it is it is the importer in the United States.
We've resolved our past issues. The War of 1812's over, for example. But switching gears a little bit, can you give us an update on the replacement of the Ambassador Bridge with the Gordie Howe Bridge? And particularly for today's topic, have you looked at what the commerce flow might be in a changed manner as a result of the tariffs? It's going to have some impact, but how will that? Because your government spent like 85% of the cost of that. It was like $6.5 billion.
100% actually.
Yeah.
We're financing it. We'll collect it back in tolls. We're sure. It just might take a while. So thank you for the question, because what I really love about this job is building bridges, not walls. And this is a great example of how Canada has stepped up on your northern border. This is going to be opening in the fall, 6 new lanes of traffic connecting the busiest superhighway in the world, the Highway 401 to Toronto, right down into the I-75 system here. So superhighway to superhighway connections, 6 new lanes of traffic. There's 36 new customs booths coming into the United States on that bridge. It's creating, what it really does is show the world that we are, in this region of the world, reinvesting in our infrastructure. Because you're seeing it's creating redundancy. Right now, we've got 25% of U.S. Canada land trade crossing at a single bridge that's almost 100 years old in the Windsor-Detroit corridor. But with that change, with the Gordie Howe coming in this fall, what you're doing down here on the Brent Spence Bridge, what we're doing up in bringing critical minerals and other infrastructure supports to feed industry down in this part of the world in Canada, what Michigan and the Corps of Engineers is doing up in the Sault Ste. Marie with twinning the Soo locks, what all of this says to the rest of the world is that a region of the heartland of North America that has been underinvesting in its infrastructure is getting its act together. We are trying to make sure that we have shiny new steel here in the Great Lakes region, and we're open for business. And that's the message that I think we need to be sending.
Thank you. Question for Leader Russo. For small business owners, what are your suggestions on how small business owners should advocate? And I guess tangentially, what do you expect the impact on small business owners would be of tariffs?
Well, I mean, as I noted before, many of these tariffs ultimately get passed on to consumers, whether that's an everyday consumer buying a good at a small business, or it's a small business, buying the supplies that they need, whatever that may be, depending on the business itself. I think this, just from a state perspective, and even advocating in general to our federal partners as well, it is telling the story and making sure that policymakers know the very direct impact to your small business, to your customers, the decisions that you are having to make as a result of these policies. And so that would be my recommendation, is to share those stories, share those very real examples. For me as a policymaker, regardless of what the issue is, understanding the real world on the ground impact is incredibly important as we're navigating decisions that we're making.
Stories, right? It's those stories of local microbreweries who can't get their aluminum casks or can't get the aluminum for their cans. Those make a huge impact, and there are so many stories like that. I think it was with the steel tariffs, there was some studies done of what that impact was the last time around in the first Trump administration. And they did see like 1,000 new jobs in the primary steel industry, but they also found a loss of 75,000 jobs in the steel using industry, sort of one level down. And those stats are great, but nothing communicates the way a story does.
My name is Mindy Wright. I'm a member of the program committee. I am an everyday citizen who was born in Ohio. I grew up feeling that Canada was our friend, and I want to know what people like me can do to support our neighbors to the north besides buying more Louise Penny books.
Thank you for that. It's being in the Midwest is the best place in the world to be a Canadian diplomat. I have to say, the outpouring of solidarity has truly been a pleasure. Look, come visit. We'd love to have you. It's a great place to spend the summer, and many of you I know do. But really, it is a question of you are the citizens of a great country who have a voice, and telling that story of, yes, there's a place for tariffs. Yes, there's a place for very robust economic initiatives, and certainly the president is shaking things up. But the great strength of the United States is the alliances it's built. It has created the American project that has given us and the world so much peace for 80 years. And your Canadian allies appreciate that. And understanding that those alliances are the great superpower of the United States is a great message to deliver to your federal leaders.
Thank you. A question for Bala. Should corporations like Greif take a public stance on trade policy when it threatens workforce stability? Or is neutrality just the cost of doing business?
As I was saying earlier, corporations are looking at this very, very, very closely. Corporations would like to see where things stand before they actually come in. So today you do not know when you want to take a stance. When Dan started this conversation this afternoon at 12 noon, he was checking his watch to see what is the latest news feed. So where does the corporation draw the line in terms of where to take a stance? You take a stance when you know what is out there, when you know that what's out there could change anytime, even before you put out a stance, or you could bring your other colleagues together to talk about this. That's a conversation that's happening around organizations in the Fortune 500 organizations across. So they're waiting to see what's out there.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. So I think public support for tariffs in the U.S. is largely motivated by the loss of good jobs over the past several decades, right? Jobs that pay a living wage, allow families to buy a home, have health insurance and retirement benefits. Are there domestic policies that the U.S. and Canada can collaborate on to help support the rebuilding of the middle class?
Well, I'll take a stab at this. I mean, I think that, and yes, you are absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of debate about what some of these policies over the years have done specifically to Ohio jobs, Ohio workers, Ohio manufacturing, and we've seen loss of those industries. I think, we are looking at how can we more strategically build advanced manufacturing that can be sustained in the future, or looking at, just yesterday we had a delegation from Quebec, and we were talking about, the growth here in Central Ohio, where I represent, which is Ohio State, right next to Ohio State, the growth of the biopharmaceutical industry as well, and the potential there and opportunities for collaboration. And so I think that, it is maintaining those strong relationships between the two countries, but also looking at how specifically here in Ohio and in the United States, we build a resilient workforce that is ready for those jobs in the future, and not necessarily jobs in industries of the past. And how can we better do that and collaborate in that way? So that's what immediately comes to mind for me.
Yeah, the Ohio delegation, when we renegotiated the NAFTA, was pushing this point all the time. And it has a huge resonance in Canada because we're another high-wage jurisdiction. We were seeing a lot of investment flowing outside of Canada, outside of the Great Lakes region, to Vietnam, to China. And we did things in that agreement. We created the $16 an hour requirement on a plant-by-plant basis in Mexico. The Mexicans were actually, they wanted to see their wages rise, right? And so the part of the grand bargain there was, you raise your wages, you'll still get, we will prioritize North American supply chains. We'll give some incentives to high-wage jurisdictions. There's some more credit to the high-wage jurisdictions so that everyone can be starting to move up. And in return, Mexico got a lot of investment back that was never going to come back here or to Canada from China and Vietnam. But what we really saw was a return of investment back to the Great Lakes region. So Canadian domestic investment that had been going offshore has been coming back. You see the signs on it in Ohio all over the place. There's a lot of Canadian money down here now that was not coming to the United States and Ohio before that agreement was signed. So there are things that we can be doing. We have both last year, in a coordinated response to Chinese trade practices on EVs, put 100% duties on Chinese EVs, both in Canada and the United States. We put the 25% tariffs on China on steel and aluminum. Canada is the one that's really paying for that, by the way, in terms of what we are doing together to support the auto sector here. China put on Canada 100% duties on many of our major agricultural products, but we had to do it because we had to support this industry that's so important to both of us. That's what we can do as partners, and that's what we do as partners.
Next question, what does it mean primarily to consumers, and how important is it that a behemoth like Walmart has stated that it will raise prices due to tariffs next month? Is this a sign of things to come?
Yes, I think so. You know, and this is, you know, the situation that has been created by these policies. You know, again, the costs don't just get absorbed, they get passed along to consumers. I was actually listening to a really interesting story a couple of weeks ago about, you know, how this is going to impact the cost of Christmas and toys. If you think about, you know, where toys are manufactured, where they come from, and the additional cost, and ultimately that gets passed on to families and parents, you know, because we will still be seeing these impacts for months to come, years to come. So again, at the end of the day, the price will be paid by consumers, small businesses, farmers, et cetera.
Hi, Eric Korolak with the Center for Employment Studies. The tariff tightrope stretches across the country, and I suspect this conversation could happen anywhere in the U.S. with much the same comments, no shade being thrown, in Atlanta or in Austin as here in Columbus. Consul Bird, welcome to Columbus. You mentioned 600-700 companies, Canadian companies operating in our state that might be at risk with a more aggressive tariff policy. And I'm interested if we could talk a little bit more about the how tariffs might adversely affect Ohio at the expense of places like Georgia and Texas. So the intra-national regional disparities of a more aggressive tariff policy that leaves us at a much higher rate of tariffs than we currently have.
Well, the auto sector, there are nodes of the auto sector throughout North America, right? There's the southern, the southeast, southwest. There's the Great Lakes region, and this region functions on an integrated basis. We've been building cars together across the U.S. Canada border for 120 years now. And in that, we have created centers of expertise. We've divvied out that trade. It's worked enormously to your benefit. You have a $3 billion automotive trade surplus with us, right? But we do it together because it makes sense for the businesses. We get comparative advantages, we get specializations. If you put a tariff wall down the middle of the Great Lakes, that disrupts you from your largest export market for your cars, that disrupts all of your supply chains, why would you think that any new investment that would be coming to the U.S. would be coming back into the Great Lakes ecosystem? I think the reality is that this region is disproportionately impacted by a tariff policy, at least vis-a-vis Canada, and it is disproportionately at a greater risk of losing investment going forward if a tariff wall comes down in the middle of your supply chains and deprives you of your largest export market.
You know, we've talked a lot about, I think, the auto sector, auto manufacturing sector. I just noticed we had some of our friends from Synovus here, which is energy. You know, if you just think about, for example, the Toledo and the concentration, for example, of refineries that are there because of its proximity to where we are importing petroleum from Canada. You know, I could go on and on about why, just because of our location specifically in this region and the types of sectors and industries, that you're going to see the impact much more significantly here in Ohio as part of that Great Lakes region, as opposed to like a Georgia or maybe even a Texas, for example. You know, we could go on and on into multiple sectors. We could probably spend an hour up here talking just about the energy sector impacts as well.
I hesitate to talk oil in front of certain people in this room who know it far better than I do. But that reality that 70% of the feedstock into Midwest refineries is crude from Alberta in Canada. You're getting that at a discount from the world price. It's typically been around 18-20. I think it's a little less right now. But that has been a strategic advantage for this region, to be able to get, and your refineries are all sort of designed and adapted for that input feedstock. That has been a tremendous asset and part of what has made this the manufacturing heartland of America. And so you play with those relationships at your own economic loss.
So we often work with our students, and we're talking about international relations, bilateral or multilateral, and the trade in particular may have some nuts and bolts that's, is what it is, but it's within a larger context of a relationship. And so when we're talking about intercultural understanding, it's about trust and respect before you can then get into the nitty-gritty. And if you do that, you have much more success and long-term mutual benefit. Our students often ask, why is this not happening by the leaders of our country? And I'm wondering, particularly Consul General, for you, and in as much diplomacy as you can muster, to what extent does things like statehood, as ridiculous as it may sound to many of us, we've also learned that ridiculous things that sound ridiculous to people are also actual priorities of the administration. And this isn't a political thing as much as what is the context within which this conversation is happening, and where does the trust and respect barometer go?
It came as a surprise to me, as I think probably to everyone in this room, when we started hearing 51st State conversation. I'll say it diplomatically, it didn't go over well in Canada. Look, we're as patriotic as anyone. Canadians have fought and died under our flag. And we have fought and died under our flag alongside American soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen. And we're proud of that. So that does have an impact. It certainly has had an impact. You've seen, I think the airline group is saying that summer bookings from Canada to the U.S. on the airlines is down 70% for the summer. That has a huge impact on I think one in 20 of people who go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame are Canadians. They're seeing a 30% reduction in the numbers there. That has impacts on a lot of small businesses right around the state. And it has an impact on the relationship and feelings in Canada. But fundamentally, there's a sense of hurt that's associated with it. But the reservoir of good feeling and connection with our American partners, I think, can withstand a lot of storms.
I don't have to be as diplomatic because I belong to the minority party at the moment. I see this as the most ridiculous trade war, sort of souring of, trying to sour a relationship that, quite possibly, certainly in my lifetime, And for what gain? I've yet to figure out what is the positive gain of this, not only for Ohio, but for all Americans. I mean, not only do we have this deep economic relationship, but cultural relationship, as you pointed out, we've fought side by side in wars together. The tourism piece of this and how important, having Canadians that are coming into the United States to enjoy our country and vice versa. It's baffling. And, just this week we were having a conversation about, how can we as a legislature, how can state legislatures reaffirm, our relationship with Canada and why it's so positive and mutually beneficial. And, that we've gotten to a place with some folks in the majority party that even reaffirming that a positive relationship with Canada becomes politically tricky is absurd.
Everyone, I wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal from Doug, so we'll turn it back over to Matt Barnes for concluding remarks.
Well, thank you all for that conversation. I do want to tell you, Council General, I think most of the people in this room are rooting for Canada. They're with you, except on the hockey rink come the Olympics. It's not going to happen. Yeah, it's not. We're kind of done losing to Canada on that, hopefully. But I hope you do find today's conversation enlightening and informative as we learn more about the relationship our countries have, and specifically Ohio and Canada, and how important that relationship is. So thank you so much for enlightening us all for that. Thank you once again to the Ohio Manufacturers Association for being today's sponsor. Of course, our partners as well, the Columbus Council on World Affairs and the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. Our presenting sponsor of our live stream, Center of Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Ellis for hosting us. And one more big round of applause for our speakers, Colin, Allison, Russo, Bala, and our host, Dan Eaton. Again, thank you so much, because I know it's not a short drive down here, so I appreciate you coming down. There is no forum next week as we all celebrate our Memorial Day, so make plans to join us here June 4th, right here at the Ellis, for Unraveling Recovery, How Cutting Medicaid Threatens Ohioans in Crisis. You want to come for that one as well, Speaker Russo, or you're now she's like, I can't come every week, but thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a great afternoon.